Hi, this is Elaine Shannon. I'm a journalist and contributing editor with the Cipher Brief. Today we're talking about the intelligence community's unprecedented decision to list the Mexican drug cartels as the number one threat to American national security. This is unusual. It's very serious. It means that transnational organized crime is our biggest threat, and it's sitting on our border and sometimes in all of our cities and in our states. We're talking today with Ray Donovan, who until recently was Chief of Operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Ray has been a long career worrying on exactly this problem and watched it get bigger and bigger and bigger. Thank you, Ray, for joining us.
Elaine, thank you for having me. It's great to meet you here today. I know we've spoken in the past, but this is our first kind of interview one-on-one. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, let's just jump right in. The Trump administration, the intelligence community has for the first time ever made the cartels in Mexico the number one national security threat to the U.S. What does that mean, and what will change, if anything?
So it changes a lot. So prior to that moment, the Mexican cartels were primarily criminal organizations. So it means that law enforcement was focused in on them to the degree that we can go after them. It was never really a national security high priority for the United States until the designation of those cartels becoming FTOs, or foreign terrorist organizations. That completely elevates their status, and it crosses over many government entities across the board, not just law enforcement, such as DEA, FBI, HSI, Marshals, but it goes into DOD space. It goes into intel space. And so what we have here is a unique time, a unique opportunity to present a whole of government approach to going after these groups that have really for so long wreaked havoc across America in regards to victimizing towns, communities, cities, in trafficking large amounts of synthetic drugs such as methamphetamine and fentanyl, but historically things such as cocaine, heroin, marijuana, with so many people directly being impacted across America. This was the break point. This was the moment in time the Trump administration basically said enough's enough.
Well, they're also trafficking in migrants now. Some tell me that they're even making more money shaking down migrants, threatening them, or just charging them fees for transportation than they are for some drugs. I don't think a lot of people realize how big these cartels are. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. These cartels are massive. I mean, they're not just here in the United States. For example, the Sinaloa cartel is in 65 countries worldwide. Mm-hmm. I mean, CJ&G has tentacles all over the world. And we've seen that from West Africa to all over Europe to Asia, clearly the Western Hemisphere. They got global reach. They're not only involved with drug trafficking. As you mentioned, Elaine, they're involved in other transnational crime, sex trafficking, human trafficking, oil theft, kidnapping, extortion. You can go on and on and on.
They're also deeply ingrained in parts of the government of Mexico, which has been one of the problems, hasn't it?
It has been. One of the issues in Mexico, historically speaking, has been to be able to challenge the cartels meant, in some cases, challenging the establishment behind the cartels. And what does that really mean? That means the corrupt politicians and officials that support, and in many cases are the backbone to the cartels at the local level, the state level, and even the national level. And so I think that the designation also puts a tremendous focus on that, on who's behind the cartels, who's allowed them to thrive for so many years. And this designation and the laws behind it now are incredibly important for our ability as a nation in the United States to really hold them accountable.
Recognizing excellence in national security, The Cipher Brief Honors Dinner celebrates those who've made a real difference in protecting our nation. It's an unforgettable evening with top leaders in the field. Join us in honoring these remarkable contributions. Reserve your seat now at cipherbriefhonors.com.
Well, back in the day, DEA, and to some extent FBI too, they were often butting heads with the intelligence community in Mexico and a few other places because the intelligence community has a historically different message and mission. There are a lot of Russian spies, diplomat spies, Chinese spies, diplomat spies in Mexico. Terrorists use that platform. There may be some Iranians, and there may even be others. Do you think that all of these agencies can work together with one mission for a change?
Yeah, I think we don't have a choice, right? And say we're talking about as a government, we don't have a choice, right? This is much bigger than one agency's mission. It really is about national security. Look, Elaine, from 2015 to 2024, over 500,000 Americans has succumbed to overdose deaths and poisonings. The line has been drawn. Enough's enough. Whether it's China, right, as it relates to transnational crime or intelligence operations coming into Western Hemisphere, or it's Mexican corruption and cartels, it's time for us to hold that line. And I think that's what this message is more about. It's about we can't have Americans dying without any response. This is the response.
And we know that cartel hitmen have come into the United States and killed people in our country too. And not much has been done about that. More should be done. But let's talk about China for a moment, the alliance between the Mexican cartels and China. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, that alliance between the Mexican cartels and China goes back many, many decades. It goes back into the late 80s, 90s, when we first started seeing methamphetamine flow into the United States coming from Mexico. So the precursor chemicals are produced and exported from China into Mexico. Those precursor chemicals for meth production. Right. So we know that there's a long-standing relationship between the chemical industry and the Mexican cartels. Who's behind the chemical industry? In many cases, it's the PRC and the CCP. We know that based on my testimony last year before Congress in April, where we openly said that we have many Chinese companies that are subsidized by the Chinese government and or owned directly by the Chinese government are also producing illicit chemicals, including fentanyl and fentanyl derivatives that are being shipped to Mexico or directly to the United States from China. So we know there's a long-standing relationship that goes back to when methamphetamine first started to be produced in Mexico. And from that, those relationships got stronger and stronger over time until they introduced fentanyl into the market around 2012. And so once fentanyl was introduced to make heroin stronger, they then had two streams of chemicals flowing into Mexico, one for meth production, the other for fentanyl production, now hitting markets in the United States. So it was incredibly challenging for us in law enforcement to get after that problem, especially when you have a global drug trade now that is synthetic. So it's not dependent on the weather or crops or water stream, building clandestine labs in the mountains of Chihuahua or Durango or Sinaloa. Now you have synthetic labs that are in the cities, in the industrial areas that are mass producing millions upon millions of fentanyl pills and pounds of methamphetamine.
There's another issue, too, with China, and that's the money laundering. China is very, very good at it. The Mexicans, cartels, have not been so good at it. They've just been carting around dollars, cash, but they don't want to keep their money in Mexico many times. Many times they want to buy an apartment building in Los Angeles or New York even. And they need a sophisticated system to get the money clean and get it into real estate or stock or whatever they want to do, or crypto. How does that work?
So that's a really intricate system of money laundering. By and large, it's done through trade-based money laundering, meaning the Chinese organized criminal groups that are based in Mexico will collaborate directly across the aisle with Mexican cartels, and they'll get contracts to move that money, meaning have that money picked up to the United States. Eventually, that money is utilized to buy American goods. The American goods are shipped to China, where they're sold for 200-300% markup, recoup money and recoup the investment that way. And they manufacture goods that are then shipped to Mexico. That's just one methodology with many nuances within it. So you now have the Chinese criminal groups that are on the top of the drug trade, meaning that they're providing the precursor chemicals for production, right? And they're also at the bottom of the drug trade. They're also laundering billions of dollars in drug proceeds. And so that has been the change, not only because of synthetics and chemicals coming into an illicit drug market, but also technology. So the ability to communicate on end-to-end encrypted applications, the globalization of technology through digital currency. So we've seen criminal groups really expand their operations because of that. So the world's gotten a lot smaller, and so criminal groups have a lot more reach. And so that's the interconnectivity between China, Mexico, and the United States.
And one more thing, let's talk about the risk. American banks, international banks, reputable banks are at great risk, aren't they? Particularly because of the designation of the cartels as terrorists. Now there's the American law makes it much easier to charge them too if they are sloppy and
Yes,
take
it
the
does.
wrong people's money. So tell us
Yes, it
about
does. Yes, it does, Elaine. So obviously, the designation to foreign terrorist organization elevates the risk to banks, banking institutions, not only in the United States but throughout the world. Any connectivity to Mexican cartels is connectivity to a foreign terrorist group, and so. But it's not only limited to the banking institutions. It's any company that does logistics between Mexico and the United States. It could be international companies that cross both sides of the border. There's other areas, express mail service providers. There's different areas that cross into the cartel. Sometimes it's knowing, sometimes it's unknowing. But they have a responsibility to do diligence and ensure that their companies are not connected to the cartel in any way, shape, or form. Because what's the outcome? The outcome is they have a lot of risk and a lot of exposure. And so this designation also changes their operations as well.
and they better pay attention to who their customers are, or they will get in trouble and have to pay a lot of money in fines and maybe even criminal charges
That's
if
right.
they're intentional. Well, look, this is fascinating and very frightening, but it is our world. It's the reality. I really appreciate you helping us try to get our arms around this very serious issue. Thank you,
My
Ray.
pleasure. My pleasure, Elaine. Thank you so very much.